Hello everyone. So, in this week where we are talking about emotions, culture, and inclusive design, we are now at the last topic, which is about inclusive design. So, we will look at its principles and how to put it into practice. First, we will look it into design practice, then into user experience research practice. So, the key learning outcomes are distinguishing accessibility, universal design, and inclusive design, and recognize why exclusion is a design failure, not a user's limitation. We will map common disability and assistive technologies to the PORE and WCAG principles that guide typography, color, interaction, and semantic structure. We will plan UX research that recruits diverse participants, adapts methods, and synthesis findings into inclusive, actionable design decisions. So, there are three things: accessibility, universal design, and inclusive design. So the whole idea of accessibility, it started with disability rights and legislations, and the focus over here is removing barriers for people with disabilities. It is often a reactive and compliance driven thing, and it is supposed to meet certain defined guidelines. Then comes universal design. So here the origin is from architecture, and Ron Mace in 1985 started talking about it in architecture. Then Cornell in 1997 came up with 7 principles of it. So focus over here is one product for the widest range of users, no adaptation or specialization, proactive design for diversity from the start itself. What we are into the phase right now is more called as inclusive design. The origin comes of Microsoft design and Treviranus and digital interaction design. So the focus over here is recognize wherever exclusion is happening, learn from the diversity, extend the benefits. And the approach over here is co-design with excluded communities, solve for one so that it can be extended to many. So, what is inclusive design? Inclusive design extends beyond accessibility compliance by actively involving users with diverse abilities, backgrounds, and contexts throughout the design process. It draws on 3 intertwined traditions: accessibility, which is about removing barriers for disabled users, often compliance driven; universal design, wherein I am talking about one product for the widest possible range of people; and inclusive design, where I co-design with excluded communities, solve for one and extend to many. Designing for disability benefits everyone. Captions help in noisy environments, say for example, voice control helps while driving, and high contrast benefits users in bright sunlight. And that's the whole philosophical approach of inclusive design. Now, why accessibility matters? So, there is an ethical imperative. Over 1 billion people globally live with some kind of disability. The social model locates the barrier in their environment, not the person, and exclusion is a design failure. The legal requirements. Several countries have passed legal requirements which mandate accessibility. Non-compliance carries legal risk and reputational damage. Better design for all. Curb cut effects, features designed for disability benefit everyone. So as I told you, so if you are designing for high contrast, so some which is useful for visually impaired people, but also when you go into the sunlight, the screen becomes still visible to the person because of the high contrast mode into which it can shift. So captions, for example, are going to help in the noisy environment. Similarly, voice control helps not only people who have motor impairment, but can also be used when you want to use it in hands-free context. So there are different types of disabilities, and these disabilities can be temporary, it can also be permanent, and it can be also like there are also different degrees to which the disability happens. So let's say visual impairment. It affects about 300 million people worldwide, and it can be from permanent blindness, low vision, color blindness. It can be situational. So there is glare, there is motion. So when we are designing for this context, we look at creating some screen readers. So I will design the content in a manner that screen readers can be used to read it aloud. I also design for greater than equal to 4:1 contrast ratio. I design it for scalable text and non-color indicators for people who have color blindness. Now coming to auditory impairment. So in this particular context, there are about 466 million people with disabling hearing loss. Some people might have permanent loss like deafness, hard of hearing. Some people might get a situational loss, so in a noisy factory floor or quiet library where you cannot make noise, or some kind of an ear infection that you might have got at that point of time. So the design over here tries to see how can I include captions, how can I create visual alerts and not just rely on sound-based alerts only. How can I create haptic feedback, transcripts, adjustable audio balance in order to solve these problems. Then comes motor impairment. So limited dexterity, strength or range of motion, any of these can fall under this category. It can be a permanent feature, so somebody having a paralysis or a difference between the limbs or some kind of tremor. It can be also situational. So let's say somebody is wearing thick gloves or holding a child. So the design should accommodate large touch targets, so greater than equal to 44 pixels. Keyboard navigation should be possible in case one is not able to handle the mouse. We can also have this possibility that you have switch access. So like I have separate switches and people can access using it, or I can use voice control. Somebody can also have cognitive impairment. So in this particular context, it can be about memory, attention, language, or learning related impairment. So permanent like dyslexia, autism, intellectual disability, or situational like because of high stress or information overload. So here we try to design our products with plain language, consistent navigation, clear errors, minimal cognitive load. So the 7 principles of universal design which Connell mentioned, and we keep using it in our design practices, are as follows. Equitable use. So useful and marketable to people with diverse abilities. Avoid segregating or stigmatizing users. Provide equivalent means of use for all users. So like it should be the same thing can be used by using either a keyboard, voice, or touch, so that you can bring in equity in use. Flexibility in use. Accommodates diverse abilities and preferences. Provide choices in methods of use, pace, precision. Support both novice as well as expert use. So you might have also seen in YouTube you have this option of making the video go at a slightly higher speed. Simple and intuitive, easy to understand regardless of experience, education, language, or concentration. Minimize complexity, organize information clearly. The fourth guideline, perceptible information, communicates necessary information effectively to all users regardless of their sensory abilities. So provide redundant cueing like visual plus audio plus haptic, sufficient contrast and legibility. Fifth, tolerance for errors. Minimize hazards and negative consequences of mistakes. Provide warnings for high stakes actions, undo functionality, and fail-safe defaults. Low physical effort. Used efficiently and comfortably with minimal fatigue. Minimize repetitive actions, reduce force required, and support different kinds of postures. Size and space. Adequate space for approach, reach, and manipulation regardless of body size or mobility aid use. Accommodate wheelchairs, crutches, and walkers. So now let's look at some of these assistive technologies which are in place, which helps all the contexts that we have discussed till now. So screen readers. So they are usually used by blind people or people who have low vision users, or maybe somebody who does not want to read and just want to listen to it. So there are certain tools like NVDA, JAWS, VoiceOver convert on-screen content to synthesize speech or braille. So what we are supposed to do is we use semantic HTML, proper heading, hierarchy and area labels, logical tab ordering and alt text in order to accommodate for that. Now let's say you can also design for screen magnifiers. So low vision users with 2x to 16x magnification requirement. So there are tools like zoom text, magic, user pans across the magnified view. So here in this case I try to design responsive layouts that reflow at zoom. So no fixed width containers, no content clipped at high magnification. So you have to design it in that particular fashion. Now coming to switch access. So used by people with severe motor impairment. So how it works, one or two physical switches scan through the interface elements and user selects when the target is highlighted. Here I am designing for linear focus order, large well spaced elements, no hover dependent actions. Voice control. So this is used in motor impairment and whenever we want to do hands-free action. So there are certain tools like Dragon, voice control, voice access map, spoken labels to on-screen elements. Now here if I am trying to do the design for such context, I can do visible labels matching accessible names, unique names for distinct actions, no unlabeled icons because then people will not know how to verbalize it that I want to go to that or do this. So the WCAG 2.1 and the PORE framework talk about that when you are designing, your design has to be perceivable, operable, understandable and robust. So perceivable, which means users can see and hear the content. Operable, users can navigate and use controls. Understandable, content is clear and UI is predictable. Robust, works with assistive technologies. So in order to achieve all of these things, I can do different kinds of treatments. One of the most important treatment is accessible typography. So how do I make this accessible? I have to work on the font size, line height, contrast and font choice. So minimum 14 pixels for body text when you are using it on desktop, 16 for mobile. Large text accessible, large text easier to read by everyone. Don't rely on the font size alone for hierarchy. Then comes the line height. So the minimum is 1.4x font size. So extra space between the lines helps in dyslexic reading and people with low vision. Then comes to the contrast, minimum 4.5:1 contrast ratio for body text and 7:1 for AAA. Affect colorblind users, low vision and bright sunlight. Font choice. Prefer legible sans serifs for body. Avoid decorative or ultra thin faces. Ensure distinguishable letter forms for I versus L. So here you can clearly see that you cannot distinguish between these two. There is still little bit of distinction but still quite low. So usually I have this confusion between I and L, 0 and O. So use the font so that they are clearly distinguishable. And also how will you support dyslexic readers? Colors is another important aspect in accessible design. So the key challenge over here is about 8% of men and about 0.5% of women are colorblind, mostly red-green color blindness. So never rely on color alone to convey certain kind of information. Solution. So use color plus pattern, color plus text labels or color plus icons. So ensure there is sufficient contrast between the foreground and the background. So let's say I have a red color and on top of that if I try to write with pink color text, the contrast is extremely low. However, if I write with white color text or black color text, it is much easier to see. So you have to ensure sufficient contrast between this foreground and background. Provide colorblind friendly palettes. There are certain palettes available which helps you to understand if your product is supposed to be your product should be actually friendly to people who have color blindness. So you select the palette accordingly. So then once you have designed it, test with colorblind simulators before even going to people to check whether they can read it or not. Now, accessible interactive elements. Whenever you have these buttons and links, large click targets, so the minimum should be 44 by 44 pixels. Clear focus indicators, not just color change, use outline, background or underline. So when I hover over something or I have clicked onto something, there should be a clear focus indicators that I am there at that point. The descriptive link text, learn more about accessibility, and don't write something like just learn more, then I don't know what I am trying to learn more. So whenever you have this link, try to be descriptive enough so that people know why they are supposed to click onto that link. Whenever you have forms, explicit labels associated with inputs, not just placeholder text. So let's say I have box for adding name. Now this does not tell me exactly what you are looking for. Should I put my surname first and then my first name, or do you want just my first name? So it is good idea that you put a placeholder over there so that you put some inputs over there so that people know what to write over there. Error messages linked to a specific field should appear here itself. So let's say in the place of name I have added 1 2 3, and then there should be an error message which should say that our name should be alphanumeric string only. Success messages announced to screen readers should be also possible. Full keyboard navigation in case one is not able to operate the mouse should also need to be taken into consideration. So if you would have seen forms, you would know that even if you don't have a mouse, you can still move between columns just by pressing the tab button on your keyboard navigation. Full functionality available via keyboard. So there should be a logical tab order, because I should be able to go from one part to the next part by pressing the tab button. Skip links to jump to the main content. No reliance on hover, because mobile users can't hover. So if you do that, then your website becomes not accessible over a mobile device. Keyboard shortcuts for power users should be provided. Touch targets. If it is a mobile screen, then minimum 48 by 48 pixels. Touch targets account for fingertip size, not the mouse precision. Adequate spacing between buttons to prevent accidental taps. And haptic feedback should be given when somebody is inputting some data or pressing some button to ensure that they know that the action has been done. We also have something called as semantic HTML and testing for accessibility. So use the semantic HTML. So what that means is you have headings, then you have lists, and then you have landmarks. So screen readers can navigate the structure. Provide alternate text for images that conveys the meaning and not just only the description. Test with actual assistive technologies like screen readers, take them, or screen magnifiers or voice control, and see how the screen is performing. Involve users with disabilities in testing. They find barriers your team won't notice, because if your team does not face the same kind of disabilities, it might be hard for them to notice it. So the common pitfalls in this accessible design are late stage retrofit. So do not treat accessibility as something that you add at the end of it, to just achieve compliance. Retrofitting costs might be 10x more than integrating it right from the beginning. So always integrate it right from the very beginning. Only using color. Relying on color alone to convey meaning. So you have to remember 8% of males have color vision deficiency. Also always pair color with icons, patterns or text. Niche audience myth. Assuming 80 users are a niche audience. So they are not. We all can have situational accessibility problems also, and 15% of the global population has some kind of disability which is not situational. Plus this added to the situational impairment, so it is a majority. So it should always be a key part of your design decisions. Tool only testing. Declaring a product accessible from automated tool alone testing is not a very good idea. You should of course do them to identify the problems and then resolve them. So audits catch only 30 to 40% of these issues. Combine them with expert reviews and actual user testing. So now let's look at it in terms of the implications for user research. First, we will be talking about recruitment and the methods that we are going to use for conducting our user research. So, recruit for range. Include disabled users from the first sprint itself, not as a final validation step. Recruit across permanent, temporary, and situational impairments and across assistive tech proficiency levels. Adapt your methods. So allow longer sessions, offer multiple modalities like in-person, remote, or asynchronous, provide material in accessible format, large print, screen reader friendly, and compensate participants fairly for their time. Now, consent and dignity. Use plain language consent forms. Ask about identity first versus person first preferences. Treat participants as co researchers and domain experts, never as test subjects or edge cases. Now, implications when you are trying to do the synthesis and trying to put it into design action, the user research, whatever you have conducted. So, first one is the persona development. So, persona, look at it as a spectra. So, replace single average user persona with ability spectra across vision, hearing, motor, and cognitive dimensions. Capture context and assistive tech setup, not just their demographics only. Coming to prioritizing the barriers. Score the findings by severity, multiply, so how severe the problem is, multiplied by frequency, how frequently do you think the problem can come, multiplied by user impact, how will it impact your user in their achievement of whatever they are trying to achieve. So it's do not just look at it as raw incidence rate. So you should always look at it the severity multiplied by frequency multiplied by user impact. So one blocking barrier for a screen reader user outweighs 10 cosmetic issues. Now coming to report for action. Pair each finding with the specific WCAG criteria it violates and a concrete design fix. Track accessibility depth alongside the feature blockage, not as a separate compliance ticket. So accessibility is a human right, not at all a design feature. When we design for accessibility, we are designing for free, and that should what our aim be. Design it for accessibility. So the key takeaways from this particular lecture are as follows. There are three traditions. Accessibility, which talks about removing barriers. Universal design, which serves the widest range. Inclusive design involves diverse users throughout, reframing exclusion as a design failure. In inclusive design, we talk about co-designing with people with different kinds of abilities so that from the very beginning of the design phase, we can capture the persona of different kinds of users as a spectra and not as a typical average user. Users and assistive tech. Visual, auditory, motor, and cognitive disabilities each call for specific kind of assistive technology. Like screen readers, magnifiers, switches, voice control. So design must be perceivable, operable, understandable, and robust, and it needs to work across all these different assistive technology. Implementation craft. Readable typography, 4.5:1 contrast, large hit targets, visible focus, and semantic HTML are what you need to craft when you are making your design. Inclusive research. So recruit beyond convenience samples, adapt methods to participants, and synthesize findings as design actions. So lived experiences shape the product, not just validates it. So that brings us to the end of this particular lecture and this week. Here are some of the references that you can go through. I will see you in the next week. Have a good learning experience.